At 14:30 on July 4th, 1943, Private First Class Evan Evans pressed his cheek against a sandbag wall on Rendova Island and watched the sky like it owed him money. The clouds were broken, just enough sunlight to make the ocean glitter, just enough cover for bombers to hide until the last minute. He was 22 years old, 3 weeks in the Solomons. 0 aircraft shot down, and he was standing behind a weapon that everyone swore was great on paper and disappointing in real life, a 90mm M1 anti-aircraft gun, 9 tons of steel, a 24-pound shell, muzzle velocity around 2,700 feet per second, an advertised ceiling high enough to make pilots nervous if the gunners could actually hit anything. Evans had learned the drills at Paris Island and in stateside camps until his hands moved without his permission. Load, ram, set the fuse, close the breech, fire. But none of that mattered if you couldn't predict where a bomber would be when the shell arrived. 2 days earlier, on July 2nd, the Japanese had proven that brutally. That morning, Rendova's beachhead was a crowded, noisy machine. CBs unloading crates, Marines hauling ammo, medics moving stretchers, officers shouting at the chaos like volume could create order. Then the warning failed. No clean radar picture, no calm minutes to prep, just a sudden sound that every man remembered differently. Some said it was engines, some said it was screaming, some swore they heard nothing at all until bombs were already falling. The raid hit hard and fast. Fuel dumps, ammunition stacks, anywhere that would burn, explode, or do both. Men ran through smoke trying to save supplies that couldn't be saved. The beach became an oven. Evans watched it happen from his gun position with a sick feeling he didn't have a name for yet. The feeling of being armed and still helpless. The Marines called the northern tip of Rendova Suicide Point. It wasn't poetry. It was bookkeeping. Every supply ship had to pass it. Every landing craft funneled past it. The Japanese knew the geography, and geography doesn't care about courage. When the bombs hit, the nickname stopped being dark humor and started being a report. In the aftermath, the numbers came in like body blows. Dead, wounded, missing. Evans heard 59 said out loud, then heard a different number from a different voice, then stopped asking because the exact count didn't change the smell of burned rubber and salt water and medical antiseptic. That night, Evans cleaned his gun until his arms trembled. The metal was still warm, the recoil system still smelled like oil. Around him, the island didn't sleep. Rendova just sweated. Men dug new foxholes in mud that refilled with water as soon as the shovels left. They buried what they could. And in the dark, the unspoken truth settled over every gun crew on the island. The Japanese would come back. They always came back. And if the radar stayed blind, the guns might as well be statues. By dawn on July 3rd, rain turned Rendova into a swamp. It soaked uniforms, rotted cardboard, ruined cigarettes, and made every metal surface feel alive with rust. But the rain brought one small gift. And Japanese pilots didn't love flying in weather that could hide mountains. So the Defense Battalion worked. Not heroically, not with speeches, just with exhausted men doing ugly work because ugly work kept you breathing. Mechanics stripped parts from damaged equipment. Radar operators dried cables like nurses drying bandages. Gun crews checked the Sperry M-4 directors again and again, mechanical computers with dials, gears, and little windows that displayed solutions like they were prophecies. The problem was, the prophecy wasn't meant for radar. The M4 director was built to track targets optically. Human eyes, crosshairs, steady hands. Radar could give you range and bearing even through cloud, even through smoke, even when your eyes were useless. But connecting radar output to the director was where officers used words like unreliable and inaccurate and not doctrinal. The radar on Rendova was the SCR-268, an early set that could see airplanes but not like later war radars would. It could track, it could estimate, but the error margins were real. The lag was real. The tropical humidity was real, and if you fed bad data into a mechanical computer, you didn't get good results. You got confidence in the wrong answer. That was more dangerous than ignorance. Still, the men had no choice. Because on July 4th, the Japanese didn't care what American manuals said. They cared that the beachhead existed. At 08:45, the SCR-268 crew called it in, a large formation inbound from the northwest. Distance over 100 miles, coming down the slot from Rabaul, like every raid that had ever hurt them. The radar operator's voice in the headset was tight, professional, and too fast. Multiple bogies. Tight formation, medium altitude. Bearing 320. The words were dry, but the meaning was wet with dread. 16 Japanese Betty bombers. The Mitsubishi G4M, fast enough to punish hesitation, and behind them, a big escort of fighters, if the fighters even needed to show. Rendova's cap had been pulled away to meet another threat. That meant this time the guns would be alone. No friendly fighters diving in to scatter the bombers. No miracle from the sky. Just a line of anti-aircraft batteries on a muddy island trying to solve math problems at the speed of death. Evans looked at his crew. Roy Boone, who chewed on the inside of his cheek when he was scared. John Gamborowski, who had a way of going still, too still, like his body was trying to disappear. And the director-operator, a corporal whose hands moved over the dials like he was playing piano with gloves on. Someone behind Evans muttered, "This is the same run." Same approach corridor, same altitude band, same timing. The Japanese were betting that what worked on July 2nd would work again. On July 2nd, the beach had burned because early warning failed. And part of that failure, quiet, humiliating, very marine, was that one radar set had been accidentally ruined by the simplest mistake possible. Diesel fuel in a system that didn't take diesel. A machine killed by the wrong can. No one wanted to say that out loud now. Because if you admitted you'd been blinded by carelessness, you had to admit the dead had paid for it. So the men didn't talk about the diesel. They just kept working, kept wiring, kept checking, kept praying to whatever gods lived inside vacuum tubes. At 09:15, the air raid siren began its wail. The beach emptied in seconds. Forklifts stopped mid-motion. Men dropped crates and ran for holes they dug themselves. Medics grabbed their kits like superstition, but the gun crews stayed. They always stayed. Because somebody had to stand where the bombs were coming. Evans checked the ready rack. High explosive shells with variable time fuses. VT fuses were the dream, but Rendova didn't have the dream. This was old school. Set the fuse by calculation. Half-second increments, spin the dial, hope the number meant something in the sky. At 10,000 feet, a shell might take 18 seconds to reach detonation altitude. If your time was off by 1 second, your burst could be hundreds of yards off. In training, close made instructors nod. In combat, close meant the bomber kept flying and your friends kept dying. The director-operator called out adjustments. Range decreasing, rate steady, lead left. The Sperry M-4 clicked and whirred, gears meshing, numbers sliding, and the SCR-268 crew fed updates faster than the director could swallow them. This was the awkward marriage nobody trusted. Radar data and a mechanical computer built for eyeballs. Officers had called it theoretical. Some called it dangerous. Because a wrong solution made you waste precious ammunition and reveal your positions for nothing. Evans didn't care what it was called. He cared what it did. At 30 miles out, the order came down the line. Commence firing when solutions stabilized. The battery commander's voice over the phone sounded like it came from a tunnel. Don't wait for perfect. We're not getting perfect. Fire when you've got a lead you believe. Evans tasted the words. A lead you believe. Belief was not a statistic. Belief was what you used when math had gaps. At 20 miles, the first shells began bursting, black puffs in pale sky. Too far left, too far high. The Japanese formation held steady anyway. They'd flown through American Flak for months and lived to brag about it. To them, Flak was weather. To Evans, it was a promise that hadn't been kept yet. 15 miles. The director-operator suddenly went still. He leaned in, listening to the machine the way a man listens to a heartbeat. Then he said, quietly, almost like he didn't want to jinx it, "It's locking." Evans looked up. He couldn't see lock. He couldn't see radar returns. But he could see something else. The director stopped hunting. The little dials settled. The commands became consistent. Range, bearing, altitude, rate. The solution wasn't beautiful, but it was stable. And stable meant you could pour shells into the same box of sky. The battery commander's voice snapped over the line. "Battery, fire!" The 90mm barked and the world shook. Evans' teeth clicked together with a concussion. A shell casing ejected with a metallic scream. His crew moved like a machine built out of men. Load, ram, fuse set, breech closed, fire every 3 seconds. Again, again, again. The gun barrel heated fast. The air around it shimmered. Sweat slid into Evans' eyes, and he didn't blink because blinking felt like waste. At 12 miles, the lead Betty began to descend. They were coming down into attack altitude, low enough to aim, high enough to feel safe from small arms. The Japanese bombardier would be peering through his sight now, calm as a man doing paperwork. Evans didn't see a face. He saw a silhouette. An aircraft shaped like a cross, flying straight into a corridor of math. "Fire for effect," someone yelled. And then the sky ahead of the formation thickened with bursts. Evans watched one burst, just one, appear not beside the bomber, not behind it, but in front of it. That was the key. Not chasing the target. Placing the explosion where the target would arrive. The next burst was closer, and then, for a split second, it looked like the lead bomber flew into a fist. The right engine coughed black smoke. Then it lit like a torch. The Betty held formation for a few heartbeats. Discipline, pride, terror, then dropped out, trailing flame. A cheer tried to rise from the gun pit and died under the roar of firing because the rest of the formation kept coming. "Keep firing," the battery commander shouted. "Don't watch it fall. Keep firing." That was the rule of anti-aircraft combat. You didn't get to enjoy success until the sky was empty. Another bomber trailed smoke, then another. The bursts became a wall. The formation tightened, then loosened, then broke. The Japanese pilots suddenly realizing that this wasn't weather. This was aimed. And now the raid began to wobble, not because of American bravery. Bravery was assumed. But because of American timing. Because the shells were exploding where they were supposed to. The Japanese dumped their bombs early. Not over the beach. Not onto the fuel, into the ocean, wide and empty, because empty ocean was better than the precise box of death that waited closer to Rendova. Water geysers rose half a mile from shore. The island stayed intact, and the bombers turned, not in orderly doctrine, but in instinct. Evans' gun kept firing as they ran, because a retreating bomber was still a bomber, still a threat, still in range. The director-operator called corrections like a man reading scripture. Range 8 miles, bearing shifting, elevation up, lead right. Evans fired, and his shell burst under a bomber's belly, close enough that the airframe visibly jolted. A hammer blow of pressure. The bomber's nose dipped, then dipped harder. Then it rolled like it had been punched out of the sky. Somewhere along the gun line, another battery scored. A black dot fell, trailing smoke. Then another. Rendova's sky was becoming a wrecking yard. The Japanese raid that was supposed to repeat July 2nd was turning into its opposite. The same approach corridor, the same target. But a different outcome. Because this time, the warning came, and the math held. And Evans, unknown private, muddy boots, salt-stiff shirt, realized something with a clarity that scared him. If this worked today, it could work anywhere. If radar-directed fire could be made real here, on a soaked jungle island with half-broken equipment, then every impossible lecture back home was suddenly just cautious people protecting their reputations. But there was no time to celebrate the philosophy of it, because the raid wasn't over yet. The bombers were still in the air, the gun barrel was still heating, and somewhere inside that director, gears were still turning, trying to stay ahead of aircraft that refused to die politely. In the next 10 minutes, the fight would turn from "can we hit them" into "can we hit them enough before the machine breaks?" Because a 90mm gun can be pushed past its limits. And on Rendova, the Marines were about to find the edge. But first, Evans would learn the cruel rule of successful anti-aircraft fire. Every kill you earn forces the enemy to change, and the enemy always changes faster than the paperwork. So even as the bombers fell, a bigger question was already forming. When the Japanese came back tomorrow, different altitude, different timing, different approach, would radar still save them? Or had Rendova just used up its one perfect day? The air over Rendova didn't look like a battle. It looked like a storm that had learned geometry. Black flak bursts hung in the sky like bruises. The bombers, dark crosses, were no longer flying a clean line. They were swerving, climbing, dropping, doing anything that might break the invisible math chasing them. And the math wasn't chasing anymore. It was waiting. Evans's director operator, face streaked with sweat and grime, kept his hands on the Sperry M-4 like a surgeon. The SCR-268 radar crew fed him numbers in a steady stream. Range, azimuth, rate, altitude. The director chewed those numbers and spit out a solution, and the gun mount followed like it believed in fate. That belief was new. On July the 2nd, the gun had felt like a blunt instrument, loud, heavy, angry, and mostly pointless. Now it felt like a scalpel the size of a truck. Evans didn't have time to process the transformation. The gun crew lived inside a 3-second loop. Load, ram, set, close. Fire, over and over until the sequence stopped feeling like actions and started feeling like breathing. The barrel shimmered with heat. The recoil system thumped like a heartbeat. The smell of burnt powder mixed with wet jungle air and turned into something metallic and sharp. Like the island itself was bleeding, but refusing to die. "Target, mid-formation," the battery commander shouted over the phone line. "Don't chase the stragglers. Break the spine." That was a doctrine lesson born in real time. If you smash the center, the edges collapse. Evans swung the gun with the mount's powered traverse, following the director's commands. He caught a bomber in his sight picture. Small, distant, almost unreal. Then the director stabilized again. Stable solution, stable firing box, stable chance. Evans fired. The shell climbed. The fuse counted down. The burst bloomed just under the bomber's belly, close enough that the aircraft jerked as if it had been struck by a giant hand. For half a second, the bomber held altitude. Then the nose dipped, then dipped harder. Then the bomber rolled and began a shallow dive that turned steep in a heartbeat. It didn't explode in the sky like the movies. It just stopped flying like an airplane and started falling like a decision. Somewhere down the line, another battery fired and scored. Another black dot fell trailing smoke, then another, and another. It wasn't one gun doing magic. It was 12 guns doing synchronized violence, each battery pouring fire into the same corridor of sky, each director solving the same problem from a slightly different angle. The Japanese pilots were trying to do what training had taught them: hold formation, steady the bomb run, drop on the beachhead, turn and run. Formation discipline wasn't just pride, it was survival. A tight group could overwhelm defenses, confuse gunners, compress time. But radar didn't get confused the way human eyes did. Radar didn't blink. Radar didn't flinch. Radar didn't care that a bomber looked bigger when it was closer, or that smoke made you doubt your own sight. Radar just measured, again and again, like a metronome. By now, The Japanese raid was no longer a clean attack. It was a collapsing pattern. Bombs had already splashed into the ocean. That should have ended the mission. But the bombers still had to leave the area. Still had to cross the same kill zone they'd entered, only now they were heavier with fear and lighter with cohesion. Evans heard the director operator say something that sounded like a prayer. "Come on, stay locked." The lock mattered more than any single shell, because the moment the solution drifted, the whole system became July 2nd again. Men guessing, hoping, burning ammunition to feel less helpless. The lock held. Another bomber took a burst near its right wing. Smoke. Flame. It slid out of the sky toward the channel. Another burst, this time high, ahead, almost perfect, forced a bomber to jink. That jink didn't save it, it just moved it into someone else's firing box. This was the part nobody wrote in training manuals. Once you create a dense enough grid of timed explosions, the enemy's evasive action becomes a trap. A Japanese pilot banked to avoid flak, straight into the next battery solution. A bomber climbed to escape, making itself predictable and slow. A bomber dove, giving the directors an even cleaner rate. Every survival move fed the machine. "Cease watching, keep feeding," the battery commander barked. Because the crew had started doing something dangerous. They were looking for confirmation. They wanted to see bombers fall. They wanted proof the shells mattered. But confirmation was a luxury. On Rendova, the only proof you could afford was continuous firing while the director stayed stable. Evans' loader, hands raw, forearms shaking, jammed another shell into the breach and shouted something that Evans couldn't hear. It didn't matter. The gun answered in thunder. The recoil knocked sand loose from the bags. The concussion rattled teeth. The entire pit vibrated like the island had become a drum. Then, suddenly, the phone line crackled with something that didn't sound like orders. It sounded like disbelief. Battery reports, multiple splashes, multiple confirmed falls. Keep firing, keep firing. Multiple confirmed falls. Not one lucky hit, not one fluke, not one maybe. Multiple. Evans looked up at the sky again and saw what he hadn't seen on July 2nd. Space. Gaps. Empty air where bombers had been. The formation wasn't tightening now. It was dissolving. The Japanese escort fighters, Zeros or Oscars, depending on who you asked, weren't doing anything meaningful. They couldn't strafe 12 dispersed gun pits without flying into their own death. And without American fighters up there, the Japanese escorts had no dogfight to distract the gunners. They were spectators to a mathematics lesson. The raid's spine snapped. Bombers scattered in different directions. Some turned west toward New Georgia. Some ran north. Some tried to hug cloud edges as if cloud could protect them from radar. But the SCR-268 didn't need sunshine. It needed returns. And these bombers were big, metal, and loud on the scope. Evans' battery tracked a bomber running at maximum power, low enough to be tempting, high enough to still be in the sweet spot of 90mm fire. The director operator called the range like he was reading a clock. 8 miles. 7. 6.5. Solution steady. Evans fired. The burst caught the bomber close. So close that even from the ground, the crew could see pieces flutter away. Not gore, not bodies, just aircraft, panels and fragments coming apart like a thing losing its identity. The bomber rolled, lost altitude, and disappeared behind the tree line toward the channel. Somewhere else, another bomber hit the water with a sound the gun crews couldn't hear over their own firing, but everyone felt it anyway like a punctuation mark. Then the most dangerous moment arrived. The lull that isn't a lull. Because the sky looked clearer now. The immediate threat felt like it was passing. And that's when human beings make the worst decisions. When adrenaline starts to fade and your mind tries to pretend it's over. But radar didn't pretend. Radar kept counting. 4 contacts remaining in sector, the radar operator reported. Multiple stragglers, varying altitude. 4 remaining, out of 16. That number didn't feel real. It felt like a rumor that would die the moment someone wrote it down. Evans' battery swung toward the farthest target, near maximum effective range. The director solution wasn't as clean at that distance. The stable lock started to wobble. The director clicked, hunted, clicked again. Evans held his fire for half a breath. Then the battery commander said something that became Rendova doctrine. Even a near burst is a decision. Put fear in them. Keep them honest. Evans fired. The burst was not a kill burst. It was a message burst. Too far, too wide, but close enough to make a fleeing pilot flinch. The bomber banked away, lost altitude, and vanished into cloud. Evans didn't know if it would limp home or die later over open ocean. But he knew the raid was broken. At 0932, less than half an hour after first contact, the ceasefire order came down the line. Cease firing, check barrels, check recoil, record expenditure. The guns fell silent so abruptly that the quiet felt like pain. Evans' ears rang. His hands shook, not fear, not weakness, just the aftershock of doing one motion 100 times while your brain screamed at you to run. He leaned back against the sandbags and stared at the smoke on the horizon. Thin streaks over water, like someone had dragged charcoal across the sea. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival that had learned a new trick. The ammo numbers came in. Evans' gun, dozens of rounds, more than he wanted to admit. The battery total, a figure that made officers blink. 88 rounds across 12 guns. That wasn't supposed to produce what they'd just seen. On July 2nd, men would have laughed at the idea. 88 shells against a bomber formation. You'd be lucky to scare them, but now the claims were stacking. 2 here, 3 there, 4 from one battery, and the whispered total that no one wanted to say until radar confirmed it. 12 down. 12 Japanese bombers destroyed in one engagement. That meant more than planes. It meant crews. It meant training. It meant fuel and parts and engines Japan couldn't replace quickly anymore. It meant that for once, the beachhead wasn't the victim. It was the butcher. Someone, an officer maybe, or a radio man, said the phrase "world record" like it tasted wrong in his mouth, because records belonged in stadiums, not over burning water. Then came the second wave of reality. Paperwork. The Marines could win a fight and still lose the narrative if they couldn't explain it. Because Command would want to know how this happened, and Command did not accept "we just did it" as a technical explanation. A message arrived from higher headquarters. Short, blunt, suspicious. Confirm kill count. Confirm methods. Immediate. The meaning was clear. We don't believe you. And honestly, the Marines didn't blame them, because what happened at Rendova sounded like propaganda, the kind of story you tell to sell war bonds. But the ocean didn't lie. The debris didn't lie. The radar tracks didn't lie. Lieutenant Colonel William Shire, commanding the Defense Battalion, assembled the radar section, the director crews, and the battery commanders. He didn't congratulate them first. He didn't give them a speech. He gave them an instruction that every Marine understood. Write it down, exactly how you did it, and don't make me guess. So the men wrote. Radar operators described their settings, their tracking methods, the way they cleaned returns in bad weather. Director crews described how they handled lag, how they resisted the temptation to overcorrect, how they favored stable solutions over perfect ones. Gun crews documented fuse settings, rate of fire, and what they did when the barrels started to overheat. And somewhere in those reports, between numbers and acronyms, was a quiet admission. The manuals hadn't prepared them for the integration part. The manuals treated radar and gun direction like separate disciplines. Rendova forced them to behave like a single organism. That organism had a secret. It wasn't accuracy alone. It was tempo. On July 2nd, the Japanese owned tempo. They arrived, struck, left, and the defenders reacted after the fact. On July 4th, radar gave the Marines tempo. They saw the raid coming. They built solutions early. They started firing before the bombers entered their comfortable zone. They made the bombers react. When you flip tempo, you flip fear. By late afternoon, a combat photographer showed up. That's how war works. History arrives after danger leaves. Evans and two other Marines, Boone and Gamborowski, stood beside the gun for a photo. Their faces weren't heroic. They were blank, like men who'd just pushed a boulder off their own chest and were waiting for it to roll back. Somewhere offshore, wreckage bobbed in the swell, engine cowlings, torn metal, a tail section with markings still visible. Rendova's water looked different now, not red, not cinematic, just polluted with evidence. And out beyond that evidence was the uncomfortable moral weight nobody spoke about in gun pits. Shooting down 12 bombers meant killing over 100 men who were also scared, also trained, also far from home. Some of them might have survived the crash long enough to drown. Some might have prayed. Some might have cursed. War didn't pause to collect their stories. Evans didn't celebrate that. He couldn't. But he also couldn't regret stopping the raid, because he had watched what happened on July 2nd when the raid wasn't stopped. He had watched men burn on the beach. He had watched a hospital get hit. He had watched friends become numbers. So he stood there, hands black with soot, ears ringing, and felt the simplest truth in the world. If they came again, the guns would fire again. But now the Japanese had a new problem. Rendova wasn't Suicide Point for Marines anymore. It was starting to feel like Suicide Point for anyone who flew the daylight approach. The raid ended at SRO 932, but Rendova didn't relax. The island had learned the cruel rhythm of the Solomons. Today's victory was tomorrow's bait, because the enemy always watched what happened, and then the enemy adjusted. Within hours, Japanese commanders at Rabaul were listening to frantic debriefs from the bombers that got away, men who had flown through Flak before and lived and now sounded like they'd seen a ghost. They described bursts that weren't random, bursts that waited in the sky, bursts that appeared through cloud where gunners shouldn't see. To pilots, it felt like the Americans had learned to predict the future. That's what radar-directed fire looks like when you're the target. Not just danger, certainty. Some Marines later claimed they intercepted Japanese radio chatter calling the approach a death run. Whether the phrase was Japanese, Marine slang, or something that grew in the retelling didn't matter. The idea stuck because everyone understood it. Daylight raids on Rendova had become expensive, and the Japanese response proved the point. The next raids came smaller, higher, at night. Bombers tried to drop from altitudes where the solutions got messy and the fuses became guesses again. They tried to hide under weather. They tried different bearings. They tried splitting into tiny groups so the radar picture wouldn't look like one fat return. And Rendova's gunners learned something else. Innovation didn't end with one perfect engagement. It had to evolve. Because now the real war wasn't just guns versus planes, it was adaptation versus adaptation. Shire pushed his crews hard, not cruelly, urgently. He knew higher headquarters wanted a procedure, a clean set of steps, a doctrine. But in the Solomons, doctrine arrived late. What arrived first was rumor, passed hand to hand. Try this fuse bracket. Don't overcorrect the director. Trust the stable solution. Let the radar track settle before you chase a blip. Those weren't official orders. They were survival gossip. Other Marine Defense Battalions heard about Rendova the way soldiers always hear about something unbelievable, through half-true retellings that got more dramatic every time. 12 bombers with under 100 rounds. Radar made the director hit like a sniper. They broke a whole raid without a single bomb landing. And then the most important detail, the one that made men lean in. They did it with equipment that wasn't even meant to work together. That detail was contagious, because it implied something the Pacific Theater was starving for, a repeatable edge. Not just courage. Every unit had courage, not just numbers. Many places didn't have numbers. An edge you could carry in a crate, a radar set, a director, a wiring method, a training habit. But the Marine Corps didn't move at the speed of rumor. It moved at the speed of verification. So the questions started coming down the chain. Was the kill count real? Was it overclaimed? Did multiple batteries claim the same falling aircraft? Were some planes simply damaged and later ditched? Did anyone actually see 12 impacts? These weren't insults. They were necessary. Anti-aircraft claims were famously optimistic across every army in every war. Smoke and chaos made honest men sound like liars. That's why Rendova mattered. It wasn't just a claim, it was a pattern of wreckage, radar plots, and the sudden change in enemy tactics afterward. It left fingerprints. Still, the debate inside the Marine Corps was real, and it sounded like this. One group said it was luck, a perfect alignment. The Japanese flew straight and made themselves easy targets. Another group said, no, it was integration. The crews created a system that could be repeated. Rendova became a Rorschach test for how you think wars are won, by moments or by methods. And that debate is exactly why this story still matters. Because if you believe it was luck, you stop trying to build the system. If you believe it was method, you start training like method matters, and suddenly the next beachhead survives. If you want more stories like this, where one small, unofficial battlefield trick turns into a theater-wide advantage, hit the like button. It tells YouTube this isn't just noise, it's history. And subscribe if you haven't already. WWII. Hidden Chapters is where we dig up the moments that manuals ignored and soldiers remembered. Now, back to Rendova, because the story didn't end with 12 falling aircraft. It ended with a change in how the Pacific War was fought. The Japanese didn't quit the sky over New Georgia overnight. They couldn't. Air power was how they punished landings and delayed advances. But after Rendova, the pattern shifted. Daylight raids became rarer. Night harassment became more common. High-altitude nuisance bombing replaced medium-altitude precision runs. That shift wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. It meant Japanese pilots no longer believed they could fly through American flak and shrug it off. Meanwhile, Rendova's defenses turned the beachhead from fragile to functional. With fewer raids landing bombs on supply dumps, the artillery on Rendova could keep firing across the channel. Those big guns hammered New Georgia. The ground campaign had room to breathe. You don't win islands with anti-aircraft guns alone, but you can absolutely lose islands when you don't have them. Evans didn't see the whole campaign like a map. He saw it like a routine. Clean the gun, inspect the rifling, check recoil fluid, count remaining shells, watch the sky, and in quiet moments, rare moments, he thought about July 2nd, the day the beach burned while the warning failed. He couldn't stop seeing it. That's the hidden cost of technical success. You can solve the problem and still carry the memory of when the problem killed your friends. That's why Evans never talked like a hero in later life. He talked like a mechanic. It worked. We did the procedure. The gear held up. We got lucky. Veterans often call method luck because it feels safer than calling it mastery. Mastery implies responsibility. As word spread, other defense battalions quietly started requesting the same setup. Not officially at first, not through clean channels. Crew to crew, battery to battery. Hey, how did you wire it? What lag did you expect? How did you keep the director from hunting? This wasn't rebellion, it was pure survival. A Marine on one island didn't care what a binder in Hawaii said. He cared what kept his beachhead from becoming a funeral. Eventually, headquarters did what headquarters always does. It institutionalized what it could no longer ignore. They asked for formal procedures, they wrote training notes, they updated instructions, they sent out technical teams to replicate the integration. The trick Rendova had tested under fire slowly became policy. And that's how most military innovation really happens. Not in a lab first, but in a gun pit. But don't mistake becoming standard for becoming easy. Radar-directed fire demanded discipline. It demanded calm under pressure. It demanded crews who resisted panic corrections and trusted stable solutions. And it demanded maintenance, constant maintenance in tropical conditions that tried to kill every wire and tube. One wrong can of fuel, one corroded connector, one tired operator who forgot a step. And you were back to July 2nd. So the battalion trained like their lives depended on it, because they did. By late 1943 into 1944, the Pacific Theater's air defense picture was changing. American beachheads weren't perfect. They still got hit. Men still died. But the easy daylight raid was becoming a dying tactic. Japanese pilots learned that the closer you flew to an American perimeter, the more likely the sky would reach up and grab you. And once pilots believe the sky is alive, they stop taking risks. That matters in war. Because wars are fought by human beings, and human beings do math with emotion. If a bomber crew believes the probability of getting through is low, they fly higher, drop earlier, aim worse, and miss more. And missing doesn't just fail to kill Marines. It fails to stop supplies, fails to delay advances, fails to hold territory. So a technical change becomes a strategic one. All of this because on one morning, on one muddy island, one gun crew decided to trust an imperfect system and then made that system behave like it belonged. Not by violating physics, by respecting it. Evans didn't write a doctrine manual. He didn't invent radar. He didn't design the Sperry director. He didn't manufacture the shells. What he did, what the gun crews did, was connect the pieces in a way that worked under pressure and kept working long enough to matter. That is a kind of genius that rarely gets medals. And it raises the uncomfortable question modern viewers always ask. Was it truly Evan Evans who changed anti-aircraft warfare? Or was it the unnamed radar operator who kept the scope clean? Or the director crew that resisted overcorrection? Or the battery commander who ordered fire before the bombers were comfortable? The honest answer is, it was a system. But systems don't make good thumbnails. So history compresses it into a face. That's why the photograph matters. 3 young Marines beside a 90mm gun. No dramatic pose, no banner. Just a piece of machinery that, briefly, proved that future wars would be fought by people who could integrate information faster than the enemy could adapt. Decades later, Rendova's jungle reclaimed the gun pits. The sandbags rotted. The bunkers collapsed. The island went quiet. But the lesson didn't rot. The lesson became standard. Radar-directed fire isn't theoretical if you train the humans to trust it and maintain the machine. And that is the real ending. Not 12 bombers falling, but the shift from "we hope we hit" to "we know where you'll be." It changed how the Pacific skies felt for the rest of the war. Evans would eventually leave Rendova. The battalion would move. The war would widen. New islands, new raids, new enemies. New kinds of fear, but July 4th, 1943 stayed lodged in the battalion's identity like a scar, the day Suicide Point stopped being prophecy and became warning for the other side. Because the Japanese came to Rendova, believing American flak was background noise. And they left believing the noise could aim. That's why this story is still worth arguing about. Was it luck? Was it method? Was it one perfect day, or was it the birth of a repeatable procedure that saved later beachheads you've never heard of? If you're honest, it's all of those at once. War always is. Luck opens the door. Method walks through it, and the men in the middle pay the price either way. Evans didn't keep a trophy from that morning. He kept tinnitus, He kept memories, he kept the smell of hot steel in wet air, and he kept the knowledge that for once, the warning worked. And if you've ever wondered how wars change, how a theater shifts from vulnerability to advantage, it often happens exactly like this. Not with a famous general, not with a new wonder weapon rolled out perfectly, but with exhausted 22-year-olds on a beach they call Suicide Point, wiring together tools that shouldn't work and daring the sky to prove them wrong. If this story hit you the way it hit us, do me a favor. Tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps us keep digging these hidden chapters out of the archives and into the light. And drop a comment. Do you think Rendova was luck, method, or both? Where are you watching from? And did someone in your family serve in the Pacific? Your comments keep these names from fading, because the guns are gone, the bunkers are gone, the beach is quiet. But the lesson remains. When the enemy thinks your defenses are theoretical and you make them real, you don't just win a fight, you change the rules of the next one. This was WWII Hidden Chapters, and this was Rendova, July 4th, 1943, when the math held.